Here we're going to be diving deep into the biggest fallers in fantasy football after week 6, starting off with the Dallas Cowboys options with Dak Prescott as well as Rico Dowdle. Now, no, these aren't the biggest fallers in my rankings, but we definitely have to address them, right? You just had the Dallas Cowboys get absolutely embarrassed at home against the Detroit Lions, where you have a total of 9 points scored in this Dallas Cowboys offense in comparison to 47 points scored in Detroit. This leads Rico Dowdle to, really regress to a season low 5 carries, a season low 25 rushing yards, and really take a massive step backwards to only 10.5 fantasy points in comparison to what we had against the Giants and the Steelers over the past 2 weeks. We go ahead and we look at Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott posts 5.22 fantasy points in a game environment in which sportsbooks were saying that the Dallas Cowboys offense should have been able to put up a ton of points against what had been a soft secondary for this Detroit Lions defense. Obviously, very different situation now. And Dak Prescott just was not able to push the ball effectively down the field. The other concerning thing that I do want to point out here before we get to the positives with Rico Dowdle is this is a running back that the usage really just simply wasn't there, where you can go through and you can see Rico Dowdle have 19 total snaps. This is 19 snaps in comparison to Ezekiel Elliott at 28. Honestly, I don't care about the Zeke usage. I think this is Dowdle's backfield regardless. But what is concerning is we see in a game where the Dallas Cowboys get embarrassed and get boat raced, you actually have 22 snaps here in this Dallas Cowboys offense where they don't have a running back on the field. You have 13 third downs for this Dallas Cowboys offense. And with those 13 third downs, according to this PFF snap data, you did not have a single snap with a running back out there, obviously focusing in on Dowdle. So that's really concerning, knowing that there are a few of these Dallas Cowboys games mixed in every single season. We've already had the game against the Ravens where they're trailing like 35-19. They're trailing by a zillion going into the fourth quarter. You had the game against the New Orleans Saints where they get boat raced. Now that we have this Detroit Lions game, we've had 3 from Dallas this year. And this isn't a new thing with Dak Prescott. We can go through and we can look at some games where Dak has really fallen apart from a fantasy perspective for the past few seasons. In 2023, he had 6.3 fantasy points against the New York Giants in week 1. In 2023, you had 4.3 fantasy points against the Niners in week 5. And then also in 2023, you had about 6.1 points against the Buffalo Bills in week 15. So you've come to expect this with this Dallas Cowboys team. We obviously remember the Packers playoff game as well. And you do have to bake in that there is just the potential for a complete and utter collapse from this offense at any point. Obviously, we had Dak Prescott as the sell high candidate after week 3, after he drops about 30 points in a game where he has 379 passing yards, multiple passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. But if you didn't sell Dak then, you really have no shot to sell Dak Prescott now. And the real question that you need to ask yourself is, would you go through and would you potentially cut Dak Prescott if you were heading into the bye and you needed another quarterback to pick up for this week? Which, it is an interesting thing to ask. Like, if you're going to be picking up Justin Fields to play in week 7, if you're going to be picking up, I was going to say Caleb Williams going into the bye as well, but maybe Fields is that a good example. You're picking up a waiver wire quarterback there. Is it worth holding Dak Prescott onto your team? Are you really wanting to go through and start him week 8 against the Niners? I don't know the answer to that question, but it is something you have to consider. I have Rico Dowdle as the running back 30 in my rest of season rankings, right in the same range as Najee Harris, Jonathan Brooks, Ramondre Stevenson, and Bucky Irving. Now let's move over to a running back that I have in the Flock League, James Conner. He had been my running back 1 up until this point. Looks like DeAndre Swift is taking that job from him. I officially have Swift over James Conner in my rest of season ranks. I have moved James Conner down to RB20. He's right alongside, right behind guys like Tony Pollard, Brian Robinson, and right ahead of Jordan Mason and J.K. Dobbins. And I'm honestly considering moving James Conner down a little bit further from this point, because the main thing that I want to be focusing in on with James Conner is really the amount of snaps that he played. Like, you initially see this and I go, okay, I guess James Conner got banged up. He had to leave the game. Then he got to come back in. You had Amari Dermercado with 31 snaps. You had Trey Benson with 11 snaps. You had James Conner with a total of 16. Now, obviously, this is a game where the Packers win quite easily. This is a game that I don't necessarily think we can say that every Cardinals contest is going to look like this going into the future. I mean, the Green Bay Packers were up 24-10 at half going into the fourth quarter. They were up 31-13. So, of course, in that game environment, we're not expecting that James Cook is going to have a massive role. But just to see this turn into a three-man running back by committee, where we had already been mentioning in live streams that James Conner is kind of that ticking time bomb running back where you potentially have to be concerned about Trey Benson increasing his role as the season goes on. I am a little bit concerned of what we should expect. I mean, looking at Conner so far, I will say the saving grace that you had at least this week is you did get the 5 targets, which is a season high. So you do get some usage as a receiver. I'll talk about Trey Benson a little bit more in the waiver wire video tomorrow. So just make sure you are subscribed. But I'm concerned that this is maybe a little bit more of a running back committee than it was earlier in the year. Going up against the Chargers this next week, it's going to be a pretty tough matchup as well. Now, moving over to our next back, we are going to look at Zack Moss. I can't be confident that Zack Moss is the starting running back in Cincinnati anymore, but what I can be confident with is that Josh Allen is going to have at least 1 passing yard in the game tonight. And if you think that as well, you can actually get that free square over there on Underdog Fantasy with the link in the description as well as the link in the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you will get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. You'll get that free Josh Allen pick. And you're going to be getting a free team review in the live streams that we are doing every single night on this channel through flockfantasy.com. Just make sure you go through the link in the description with code FLOCK. And if you wanted to pair that Josh Allen free pickup with something, I would be looking at Garrett Wilson for higher than 58.5 receiving yards tonight. Now with Zack Moss, the storyline is he fumbles the ball. Then it's bye-bye Zack Moss. I mean, here you have 33 snaps for Chase Brown, 24 snaps for Zack Moss. This is the first game that we have had all year where Zack Moss is officially out-snapped by Chase Brown while Moss is presumably healthy. And what's really concerning here is it may seem like the Cincinnati Bengals have been waiting for this opportunity all along. Because we can go through and look at pretty much every single week here. Chase Brown has been the more efficient back, at least since week 2. Starting in week 2, Zack Moss, 2.83 yards per carry. Chase Brown, 7.75. Week 3, Chase Brown, 8.86 yards per carry, where Zack Moss is at 4. Zack Moss in week 4 is at 3 yards a carry. Chase Brown's at 5. In week 5, Moss is at 2 yards a carry. Chase Brown's at 3. And week 6, you have Moss at 2 yards per carry. Chase Brown at 5. I'm not going to sit here and act like yards per carry is everything. Obviously, it's typically a very noisy, quote unquote, metric. I don't even know if you would call it a metric, but it is a quick little glimpse into the efficiency that you've seen with these running backs, and that every single week, Chase Brown has been giving you more with less. Not only that, but you've also had Chase Brown now over the past 3 weeks score a total of 4 touchdowns. And this Zack Moss fumble has completely opened the door for Chase Brown to potentially be the starting guy for the Cincinnati Bengals offense. Chase Brown's the younger ascending running back in his 2nd season. Zack Moss is his older descending teammate in his 5th season. So it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world that Chase Brown is taking over as the season goes on. And honestly, we'll talk about Chase Brown really in depth in our skyrocketing players video, but I actually had to move Zack Moss down to RB 33 in our rest of season ranks behind Chase Brown at this point. And we have him in the same range as Rachaad White, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, and Zach Charbonnet. Obviously, Travis Etienne we'll have to talk about in this video, but moving over to George Pickens, I had not officially updated the ranking with George Pickens. Coming into tonight, I had Pickens ranked as the wide receiver 36, as a young option that I think you could potentially consider any given week if you needed a flex and if you were desperate. However, at this point, I think that is becoming less and less likely. George Pickens here, while you do get the 8 targets against the Raiders, what's very concerning is going through and looking at what you actually have with the snaps played in this offense, is you are seeing the consistent decline with George Pickens' involvement. You sprinkle on the fact that this is a Justin Fields offense where you are not going to have consistently high passing volume. Really, I mean, we've only had 2 weeks where you could be excited about the numbers Fields put up as a passer. That's not to say that Justin Fields isn't playing a great quarterback game. I mean, Fields has looked great so far this season. He's been great from a real life perspective. He's been really helping the Pittsburgh Steelers. But the quarterback that's going to go out there and have multiple rushing touchdowns, that's not the guy that you want if you are looking to pair a receiver with him. George Pickens only played 59% of the snaps against Dallas 2 weeks ago. Back-to-back games with only 3 receptions. You're looking at Pickens really having no red zone role, where we have seen a total of 0 touchdowns so far this year. I mean, you've had 3 games with fewer than 10 points. You've had 0 games with 20 or more points. So we had Pickens at wide receiver 36 in the same range as like Jackson Smith-Njigba, Rome Odunze, Darnell Mooney, and Jamison Williams. Like, there's no world in which I'm considering playing George Pickens over Jamison Williams this next week. Now, going over to our next player, we have to look at Calvin Ridley. Dear God, with Calvin Ridley, how bad can you be? Now, obviously, it's a game environment where Will Levis does not throw the ball. I mean, Will Levis is absolutely nothing as a passer. But coming out of the bye week, what this coaching staff said is, they said that they knew they needed to get Ridley more involved, that we should expect Ridley to be more involved in this offense. And to be honest, Calvin Ridley did have a decent amount of targets here. Ridley did have 8 targets, which was a season high. But his season high targets brought in a total of 0 receptions for 0 receiving yards. So who gives a damn? At this point, if you're looking at Calvin Ridley, this is a receiver that, let me get out the little quick calculator. Shouldn't be too many numbers. Maybe you can even do this in your head. 50 plus 77 plus 9 plus 5. He's played 5 games. Calvin Ridley is averaging, drum roll please, 28 receiving yards per game. Yes, Calvin Ridley is averaging 28 receiving yards per game. It looks like DeAndre Hopkins is playing more and more with his snap rate. Ridley wasn't exciting when Hopkins wasn't a full-time player. Your only hope with Ridley at this point is they come out and they say, we are tanking. We are going to ship DeAndre Hopkins to Kansas City. Calvin Ridley, you're going to get those Hopkins targets. And then all of a sudden, he is a wide receiver seeing 25% of the targets in a garbage offense. But for the time being, he looks very similar like Courtland Sutton. I have him in the same range of the rankings as Jalen Tolbert, Juju Smith-Schuster, Romeo Doubs, and Courtland Sutton. Now, the biggest faller has to be Travis Etienne. Whether you want to say it's because of a hamstring injury, whether you want to say it's because of a fumble, I don't know. I think we're going to get a lot more information as the week goes on. From what I saw very early Sunday morning, is I saw a running back going into a game that was already on extremely thin ice, where every chance they had, the media was asking Peterson, oh, is Etienne still your guy or is it Tank Bigsby? Is Tank Bigsby the guy? Is it Tank Bigsby? And every single time he went, no, guys, it's Etienne. It's Etienne. It's Etienne. But obviously there's something there. Obviously Etienne has been very disappointing and has been very lackluster so far this season. You're on the thinnest of ice. You go out. The offense is floundering. You're getting embarrassed globally. And then Travis Etienne looks to fumble the ball. Turns out to be an incompletion. Blah, blah, blah. Immediately you note that Travis Etienne is not hitting the field again. We're not told until a few sequences after that Travis Etienne is questionable to return with a hamstring injury, and you don't see Travis Etienne again in the game. He finishes with 3 carries for -1 rushing yards and 1 target. I thought that this guy couldn't get any lower, but where rock bottom was last week looks sky high from where we're at this week. Going into the future, what's the difference between like Travis Etienne and Javonte Williams? They're both running backs in ambiguous committees in very bad offenses that have been extremely disappointing. I think really the only hope that you can have at this point with Etienne is one, that he turned out to maybe have just been injured, and it was a real story, and Etienne's going to come out. He's going to have everything as a receiver. He's going to go back to seeing 10 to 15 rushes per game, and the Jags offense does improve. And in that case, Etienne still can probably be a running back 2 in fantasy. But there's also a scenario where Tank Bigsby takes over as the starting back, or maybe we see what happened this past week, and it's just a full-blown 3-man running back by committee between Etienne, Bigsby, as well as Dearness Johnson. And you cannot be in a 3-man running back by committee if you've been an inefficient running back and you're in one of the worst offenses in the NFL. So, like I said, Etienne plummets. Etienne, we have alongside guys like Zack Moss, Rachaad White, Javonte Williams as the other like gross running backs that nobody wants anything to do with. I do see a path upwards for Travis Etienne, but obviously it's going to be a difficult path. It's an uphill battle. But I think that's all we got for you. Of course, if you wanted to tail me with the pick tonight, I'm going to be going Garrett Wilson higher than 50.5 receiving yards. You compare that with the Josh Allen free square, more than less than half a total yard. If you sign up to Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, you'll also get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, at the same time, you'll get a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single day. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy if you are wanting that free team review. But thank you again. I really appreciate you and really hope you didn't have any players in this video.